What happens when Hollywood's brightest star walks into what should be a simple talk show interview, only to face a host whose ego is bigger than the studio itself? In just 30 seconds, one comment would ignite a firestorm that would turn a late-night set into a battlefield, exposing the kind of arrogance that reminds us why some people should never be given a microphone. The stage lights were hot that evening. Margot Robbie walked out to thunderous applause, and her smile warm and genuine as she waved to the audience. She had been on countless talk shows before, charming hosts and viewers alike with her wit, her talent, and her down-to-earth personality. This was supposed to be easy. Just another night promoting her latest film, sharing some laughs, and heading home. But Seth Meyers had other plans. As Margot settled into the guest chair, she could already sense something was off. The usual warmth that hosts extend to their guests was missing. But instead, there was a coldness in Seth's eyes, a smugness in his posture that suggested he thought he owned not just the stage, but everyone on it. "So Margot," Seth began, not even waiting for the applause to die down completely, "let me just say, it's interesting that you're here." Margot's smile faltered slightly. "Interesting? I'd hope it's more than interesting. I'm excited to talk about the film." "Right, the film," Seth said, leaning back in his chair with an exaggerated sigh. "The one where you play yet another beautiful woman who somehow saves the day. Tell me, do you ever get tired of being cast for your looks rather than your actual ability?" The audience gasped. You could feel the tension ripple through the studio like electricity. Margot's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. This was live television. She was a professional. "I think that's a pretty reductive way to look at my career," she said calmly. "I've worked with some of the best directors in the industry, and I'd like to think they hired me because I can act, not just because of what I look like." Seth waved his hand dismissively. Sure, but let's be honest here. Hollywood loves a pretty face, and you've certainly capitalized on that, haven't you?" "I've worked incredibly hard to get where I am," Margot replied, her voice steady but firm. "I trained for years. I've taken roles that challenged me. That pushed me out of my comfort zone. To suggest that my success is only because of my appearance is not just insulting to me, it's insulting to every woman in this industry who has to fight twice as hard to be taken seriously." The audience began to applaud, but Seth cut them off with a sharp gesture. "Oh, come on," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Don't play the victim card. You're one of the highest paid actresses in the world. You live in a mansion. You wear designer clothes. You're not exactly struggling." Margot's eyes flashed. "So because I'm successful, I'm not allowed to call out sexism when I see it? Because I've worked hard and achieved things, I should just accept being reduced to my appearance? That doesn't make any sense." "What doesn't make sense," Seth fired back, leaning forward aggressively, "is how you can sit there with a straight face and pretend like you don't know exactly what you're doing. You use your looks to get ahead, and then you get offended when someone points it out. You can't have it both ways." "I'm not trying to have it both ways," Margot said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "I'm trying to have a conversation with someone I thought was a professional. But clearly, I was wrong about that." Seth's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Oh, I'm the unprofessional one? That's rich. I'm the one who's been doing this job while you were still figuring out which agent to hire based on who could get you the most magazine covers." Margot leaned forward. "Having success doesn't mean I haven't earned it, and it doesn't give you the right to diminish my work or suggest that I haven't deserved the opportunities I've gotten." "Deserved?" Seth laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Let me tell you something about deserving things. I've been in this industry for decades. I've written for award-winning shows. I've hosted this program for years. And yet, someone like you, who showed up with a nice smile and good genes, gets paid more in one movie than I make in a year. So forgive me if I'm a little skeptical about what you think you deserve." The studio fell silent. Even the crew members shifted uncomfortably. This had gone far beyond playful banter or even pointed questions. This was personal. This was mean. Margot took a deep breath. So, this is what this is really about. You're upset about what I earn. You think because you've been doing this longer, you're entitled to more. And rather than celebrate someone else's success, you'd rather tear them down on national television. I'm not tearing you down, Seth shot back. I'm just being honest. Something you Hollywood types probably aren't used to. You live in a bubble where everyone tells you how amazing you are. And you start to believe your own hype. You don't know anything about my life, Margot said, her voice rising slightly. You don't know what I've sacrificed or how hard I've worked. And honestly, the fact that you're sitting here, using your platform to belittle a guest, says a lot more about you than it does about me. Seth leaned forward, his expression darkening. My platform, this is my show. You're here because I invited you. Don't forget that. Oh, as I won't forget it, Margot said quietly. Trust me. The audience was completely silent now. The cameramen didn't know where to point their lenses. The producers in the booth were frantically trying to figure out how to salvage this disaster. Seth wasn't done. You know what your problem is, Margot? You think being beautiful gives you a free pass. You think you can waltz into any room and everyone should just bow down because you've got a pretty face. Well, newsflash, sweetheart, beauty fades. And when it does, what are you going to have left? That was it. That was the line. Margot stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She unclipped her microphone with steady hands, her face a mask of quiet fury. What am I going to have left? She repeated, her voice clear and strong. I'll have my dignity. I'll have my self-respect. I'll have the knowledge that I never used my position to make someone else feel small, just to make myself feel big. Can you say the same? She placed the microphone on the chair and looked directly at Seth. You know what the saddest part of this is? I came here tonight genuinely excited to be on your show. I've watched you for years. I thought you were funny, intelligent, someone who lifted people up. But this isn't intelligence. This isn't humor. This is just cruelty dressed up as honesty. And I won't sit here and be your punching bag just because you're having some kind of personal crisis about your own relevance. Seth's face had gone red. You can't just walk out. We're in the middle of a show. Watch me, Margot said simply. She turned to the audience, and her expression softened. I'm sorry you all had to witness this. You deserve better entertainment than watching someone be humiliated. And I hope that in the future, you'll remember that kindness matters. That how we treat people, especially when we have power over them, defines who we are. The audience erupted into applause. It started with one person, then two, then suddenly the entire studio was on their feet, clapping and cheering for Margot as she walked toward the exit. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were nodding in agreement, their faces showing a mixture of admiration and anger at what they had just witnessed. A woman in the front row called out, "You're a class act. Margot, don't let him get to you." Another voice joined in, "We love you. You don't need this show." The outpouring of support was overwhelming, and for a brief moment, Margot paused. She turned back one last time, not to look at Seth, but to acknowledge the audience who had just shown her such kindness. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying across the studio. "Thank you for understanding. Thank you for being kind. The world needs more of that." Seth scrambled to regain control. "Margot, wait. We can talk about this. Come back. Let's start over." She didn't turn around. She didn't acknowledge him. She just kept walking, her head held high, her shoulders back, every step radiating the quiet confidence of someone who knew they had made the right choice. "Margot, please," Seth's voice cracked with desperation. "I was just trying to have an honest conversation. That's what we do here. And we have real talk." But Margot was already disappearing into the wings, and the audience's applause was drowning out his protests. He looked around wildly, seeking some kind of support, some validation that he wasn't the villain in this scenario. But everywhere he looked, he saw disappointment and disgust. "Cut to commercial!" Seth shouted at his crew, his voice shrill and panicked. "Somebody cut to commercial right now!" But the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of his panic. His desperation, his complete loss of composure. The technical director in the booth was frozen, unsure whether cutting away would make things better or worse. This was live television gold, after all, even if it was coming at Seth's expense. A production assistant rushed over to Margot as she reached the side of the stage. "Miss Robbie, please, maybe if we just take a 5-minute break?" Margot shook her head gently. "I appreciate that, but no. I came here to be a guest, not a target, and I won't subject myself to any more of that man's bitterness." Back on stage, Seth was trying to address the audience, but his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. "Look, things got a little heated there. Sometimes in comedy, in conversation, lines get crossed." Someone from the audience shouted, "That wasn't comedy. That was just mean." Others joined in, their voices mixing together in a chorus of disapproval. Seth held up his hands, trying to calm them down, but it was useless. He had lost the room completely. "Please, just everyone calm down," Seth pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. "We're all adults here. We can have a frank conversation without people getting offended." But the audience wasn't having it. Another voice rang out, this time from an older gentleman in the third row. "She wasn't offended. You were offensive. There's a difference." The murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Seth could feel his control slipping away with each passing second. This was his show, his domain. How had it all fallen apart so quickly? "I think people are being a little too sensitive," Seth tried again, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "I ask tough questions. That's my job. If she can't handle that, maybe she's not cut out for this business." The gasps that followed were even louder than before. A woman near the front stood up, shaking her head in disgust. "You just don't get it, do you? This isn't about asking tough questions. This is about basic respect, something you clearly know nothing about." She gathered her purse and walked toward the exit, and 3 other audience members followed her. Then 5 more. Then 10. The exodus had begun, and Seth could only watch in horror as his audience literally walked out on him. In the hallway backstage, Margot was approached by several crew members. "We're so sorry," one of them said, a young woman with tears in her eyes. "That was completely out of line. You didn't deserve any of that." "Thank you," Margot said softly. "But please don't apologize for him. He should be the one apologizing, and I have a feeling that's not going to happen." Another crew member, an older man who had worked in television for 30 years, shook his head in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like that. I've worked on hundreds of talk shows, and I've never seen a host attack a guest like that. It was unprofessional. It was wrong." A makeup artist chimed in, her voice shaking with emotion. "You know what the worst part is? We all saw it coming. The way he was acting all afternoon, snapping at people, complaining about everything. We all knew he was in a mood, but we never thought he'd take it out on you like that." "He's been under a lot of pressure," another voice added, though it sounded more like an excuse than an explanation. "Pressure is no excuse for cruelty," Margot replied firmly. "We're all under pressure. Every single person working in this industry deals with stress and competition and insecurity. But most of us manage to do it without attacking people who've done nothing to us." A young intern stepped forward nervously. "Miss Robbie, I just wanted to say, what you did out there, standing up for yourself, it meant a lot to me. I've been working here for 6 months, and I've seen how some people in power treat others. Watching you refuse to accept that treatment, it made me realize I don't have to accept it either." Margot's expression softened, and she reached out to squeeze the young woman's hand. "Good. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you have to tolerate disrespect just because they're in a position of authority. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's opinion of you." Margot gave him a sad smile. Some people, when they feel threatened or insecure, they lash out. They try to make others feel as small as they feel inside. I just hope people watching at home see this for what it really was. Meanwhile, back in the studio, Seth had abandoned any attempt to continue the show. The audience was still murmuring, some people shaking their heads, others checking their phones, probably already tweeting about what they had just witnessed. A producer rushed onto the stage and whispered urgently in Seth's ear. His face went from red to pale in an instant. Whatever she was telling him, it wasn't good news. "Ladies and gentlemen," Seth said into his microphone, his voice hollow, "we're going to take an extended break. Thank you for your patience." The studio lights dimmed slightly as the live broadcast cut away, but the damage was already done. In those few minutes, the world had seen exactly who Seth Meyers was when his ego was bruised. They had seen him try to diminish a talented, successful woman simply because he felt threatened by her achievements. And they had seen Margot Robbie refuse to play along, refuse to be diminished, refuse to let his insecurity become her problem. In her dressing room, Margot sat down and took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was wearing off. And a makeup artist came in and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," the woman said. "Walking away from toxicity is always the right thing." "I know," Margot said, "but it still feels awful. I hate confrontation. I hate making scenes. But I couldn't just sit there and let him talk to me like that. Not just for me, but for every person watching who's ever been made to feel less than by someone in a position of power." Outside the dressing room, word had spread through the building like wildfire. Other staff members, people who had worked with Seth for years, were gathering in small groups, whispering about what had happened. Some were shocked. Others, troublingly, weren't surprised at all. "He's been getting worse," one writer admitted to a colleague, keeping his voice low even though Seth was nowhere near. "More irritable, more defensive. He snaps at writers in the room when they pitch ideas he doesn't like. But I never thought he'd do something like this on air." "His ratings have been slipping," another person added, glancing around nervously. "Maybe that's what this is about. He's feeling the pressure. The network's been talking about changes. Maybe he thought going viral would help, even if it meant being controversial." "Well, he's going viral all right," a third voice chimed in sarcastically, "but not the way he wanted." "That's no excuse," the first writer said firmly, his voice rising slightly with conviction. "There's no excuse for treating someone like that, especially not a guest who came here in good faith. Margot Robbie is one of the biggest stars in the world. She didn't have to come on this show. She chose to. And this is how he repays her? By attacking her on live television?" A camera operator who had been standing silently nearby finally spoke up. "I've been working this show for 5 years. 5 years. And I've never been more ashamed to have my name associated with it than I am right now. That woman handled herself with more grace and dignity than most people could manage under those circumstances. She's the hero in this story, not him." The group fell silent, each person processing what they had witnessed and what it meant for their futures working on a show hosted by someone who had just revealed such an ugly side of himself to the world. Back in the studio, Seth sat in his chair, staring at nothing. The audience had been dismissed. The crew was packing up equipment with an efficiency born from wanting to leave as quickly as possible. Nobody wanted to make eye contact with him. His head writer approached cautiously. "Seth, we need to talk about what just happened." "Not now," Seth muttered. "Yes, now," the writer insisted. "That was broadcast live. It's already all over social media. We need to figure out how to handle this." Seth looked up at him with hollow eyes. "Handle it? How do you handle the fact that I just committed career suicide on live television?" The writer had no answer for that. In another part of the building, Margot was gathering her things. Her publicist had arrived, looking frazzled and concerned. "Are you okay?" the publicist asked, pulling Margot into a quick hug. "I'm fine," Margot assured her. "Angry? I'm but fine. What you did out there standing up for yourself like that, it was incredible. People are already calling you a hero on social media." Margot shook her head. "I'm not a hero. I just refuse to be disrespected. Every person deserves that basic level of dignity." As she headed toward the exit, Margot passed by the studio one last time. Through the doorway, she could see Seth still sitting in his chair, alone under the harsh lights. Yet the physical embodiment of someone who had let their worst impulses destroy something important. She felt a moment of pity for him, but only a moment. Then she remembered his words, his sneering tone, his deliberate cruelty, and the pity evaporated. Some people need to face consequences for their actions. Some people need to understand that power and a platform don't give you the right to hurt others. The night air was cool when Margot finally stepped outside. Her car was waiting, but she paused for a moment, looking up at the building behind her. Inside those walls, a man was probably just beginning to realize the full scope of what he had done. How one moment of petty jealousy, one decision to put his ego above basic human decency, had potentially cost him everything. But that wasn't Margot's problem anymore. She had walked away from his toxicity, and she wasn't looking back. As she slid into the backseat of her car, her phone began buzzing with messages. Friends reaching out, colleagues offering support, people she hadn't heard from in years telling her how proud they were that she had stood up for herself. One message stood out. It was from a young actress Margot had mentored briefly a few years ago. The words were simple, but heartfelt. "Thank you for showing us that we don't have to accept being treated badly just because someone has power over us. You're an inspiration to us all." Margot smiled for the first time since leaving the stage. If nothing else came from this awful experience, at least it had shown people that they had the right to walk away from situations where they weren't being respected. That success and fame didn't mean you had to tolerate abuse. That your dignity was more important than any interview, any appearance, any opportunity. The car pulled away from the studio, carrying Margot toward home, toward peace, on toward a brighter future where she would continue to be successful, not in spite of standing up for herself, but because of it. Behind her, in that studio, Seth Meyers was learning a hard lesson. That you can have all the power in the world, all the prestige, all the accolades. But if you use that power to make others feel small, eventually it all crumbles. Eventually, people see through the facade to the insecurity and bitterness beneath. And when they do, no amount of charm or attempted apologies can undo the damage. The show might have been his. The stage might have been his. But the moral victory that night belonged entirely to Margot Robbie, who refused to let anyone, no matter how powerful they thought they were, treat her as anything less than the talented, hard-working professional she had proven herself to be. In the end, it wasn't about who could shout louder or who had more authority in that room. It was about who had the strength to maintain their dignity in the face of cruelty. It was about who understood that true power comes not from tearing others down, but from building yourself up without needing to diminish anyone else. Margot had walked into that studio as a guest. She had walked out as someone who had reminded the world that kindness matters, that respect matters, and that no one, absolutely no one, has the right to make you feel less than you are, no matter how big their platform might be. The lights of the city blurred past the car window as Margot headed home. Tomorrow, people would talk about what happened. They would analyze it, debate it, share their opinions. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Margot simply felt relief. Relief that she had trusted her instincts. Relief that she had valued herself enough to walk away. Relief that she had shown, through her actions, that there are some things more important than playing nice for the cameras. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in your own humiliation. Sometimes the strongest statement you can make is to stand up and leave. And sometimes the most powerful message you can send is that your dignity is not negotiable, no matter who's asking you to compromise it. Seth Meyers had learned that lesson the hard way, and the world had watched it happen in real time. Bought a masterclass in how not to treat people, delivered by someone who had forgotten that being behind a desk doesn't make you better than the person sitting across from you. It only took 30 seconds for Seth to make the comment that started it all, but it would take far longer for him to understand the true cost of letting his ego write checks his character couldn't cash. And for Margot Robbie, it had taken that same 30 seconds to make a decision that would define her not just as an actress, but as a person who knew her worth and refused to let anyone convince her otherwise. The story wasn't about a dramatic talk show moment. It was about something much bigger. It was about respect, about dignity, about the choice we all have when confronted with someone trying to make us feel small. We can shrink to fit their narrow view of us, or we can stand tall and walk away, knowing that their opinion says everything about them and nothing about us. Margot chose to stand tall, and in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that we all have that same choice, every single day, in every interaction where someone tries to diminish us. We can accept it, or we can do what she did. Speak our truth, maintain our dignity, and walk away from anyone who doesn't treat us with the basic respect every human being deserves. That was the real story of that night. Not the spectacle of a host melting down on live television, but the quiet strength of a woman who refused to let that meltdown become her problem. Who understood that someone else's insecurity didn't require her participation. Who knew that the best response to cruelty isn't matching it, but rising above it with grace and walking towards something better. As the car turned onto her street, Margot allowed herself one last thought about the evening's events. She hoped that Seth would learn from this, that he would take a hard look at what had driven him to attack a guest so viciously, that he would understand that whatever success he had achieved meant nothing if he used it as a weapon against others. But whether he learned or not wasn't up to her. She had done her part. She had stood her ground, spoken her truth, and removed herself from a toxic situation. What happened next was his journey to take, his lessons to learn, his amends to make. For Margot, the chapter was closed. She had been tested and had passed with flying colors, proving to herself and to the world that she was so much more than what any bitter, insecure host could try to reduce her to. She was talented, she was strong, she was dignified, and she was done wasting her time on people who couldn't see that. The car pulled into her driveway. Home at last. She thanked her driver, walked to her door, and stepped inside to the peace and quiet of her own space. Behind her, the door closed on a night that had started with such promise and ended with such drama. But she had survived it. More than that, she had prevailed. And tomorrow, she would wake up knowing that she had handled an impossible situation with grace, strength, and an unwavering commitment to her own worth. That was worth more than any talk show appearance ever could be.